Happy Friday, people. I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So we all know that the intelligence community would love nothing more than to apprehend NSA leaker Edward Snowden and parade him around in front of the world as an example of what happens to whistleblowers in this country. What I didn't know is that some NSA employees want to take it a step further, you know, to American Psycho levels. According to BuzzFeed, several Pentagon and NSA officials have anonymously expressed their desire to murder Snowden. A current NSA analyst told the website that, quote, in a world where I would not be restricted from killing an American, I personally would go and kill him myself. A lot of people share this sentiment. Wait a minute, we do live in a world where drones kill American citizens. What's this guy waiting for? Another anonymous Pentagon official told BuzzFeed that he or she would love to put a bullet in Snowden's head. And an Army official offered a detailed fantasy of how the murder would go down, involving injecting him with poison. You know, it's just so nice to know that Jack the Ripper and Freddy Krueger are the ones in charge of responsibly mining all of our personal data. Now let's go break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, to put something on the air, it's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait, do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do, because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire was told. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in, because we're breaking the set. Breaking the set. Breaking the set.
I'm sure that most of us has either lost someone to drug addiction or at least known someone who has. Now, drug addiction is a complicated issue. It can destroy not only individual lives, but it can break apart entire families and disrupt communities. And despite America's declared war against illicit drugs such as heroin, cocaine, and marijuana, little stands in the way of average people obtaining legal narcotics, many of which are far more addictive than the hardest drugs you'll find on the street. Now, it might shock you to learn that the U.S. is #1 when it comes to the consumption of prescription pills. In fact, a 2013 study by the Mayo Clinic shows that nearly 70% of Americans are on at least one prescription drug, and more than half take at least two, with the most commonly prescribed being antidepressants and painkillers. This epidemic is the subject of a documentary called American Addict, and it explores the road that led this country from being the land of the free to the land of the addicted.
Pharmaceutical representatives are universally attractive. They get recruited from places like cheerleading squads at Big Ten schools.
What I'm holding is a bottle of Zyprexa. Zyprexa is an antipsychotic medication. It's very popular and it's very expensive. This, among some of the others, Abilify, are very commonly diverted. The reason being is, again, the medical programs, insurance programs pay a lot of money for these drugs.
Joining me now are the producer and director of the film, Sasha Knezev, and Dr. Gregory Smith from LA. Thanks so much for coming on, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gregory, let's start with you. Why is prescription addiction such a problem in the U.S.? What is it about this country that has made addiction so endemic?
Well, that's a great question, and really that's the question that we ask in the movie, that we're about 5% of the world's population, but we're using 80% of the world's prescription hydrocodone, which are in drugs like Vicodin and Norco, and 50% of all the prescription drugs in general. So this is just not happenstance. This is a purposeful movement to get people to take medications. I mean, let's face it, sick people is a good business. Sick people that stay alive for a long period of time. So when people stay alive and they have chronic disease, these pills become the answer instead of a Band-Aid, they become the answer for the problem.
Sasha, the U.S. is only one of 2 countries in the world, other than New Zealand, that has direct-to-consumer advertising on prescription medicine. How much of that do you think feeds into this problem?
Well, it's a large problem. You know, it's very interesting, this film, to give a little background. You know, Gregory approached me. I'm a filmmaker, screenwriter, and I normally do narrative films, and I've never done a documentary. This is my first documentary. So what part of the process was, I knew the history of prescriptions based on what Greg gave me, and obviously we all have family members and friends in this country that are on some type of medication, but we started to investigate and unravel what went on, and you know, it was interesting because we really got to see how deep the rabbit hole went, so to speak. So direct-to-consumer advertising is just one of the aspects. There's several others. There's the FDA. I mean, it just, you know, we started going deeper and deeper, and I think one of the strengths of this film is that not only did we know going in what the problems were with what's going on with prescription medication and this epidemic in the country, but we kept continuously discovering more and more and more to even, you know, I was shocked personally, and I think Greg as well, to what we did discover.
Greg, Sasha just said that you went to him for the film. As a doctor, was there something that you saw in the field that made you want to make this movie?
Well, I'm just sick of seeing people dying. I'm sick of seeing people be addicted to drugs when it's not necessary. So it's sort of been a crusade of mine for quite some time. Sasha and I met at a party when I was writing the book American Addict, and so the discussion started, and he said, you should make a movie about this, and about a year later we got back together and decided to do it. But it's an enormous problem, it's unnecessary, and it's really when you merge big business and people's health, and we've seen time and time again where people's health and well-being is trumped by big business.
It's a lose-lose situation there. Sasha, in the film, you guys go to undercover to a clinic to prove how easy it is to get these prescription pills. What are these clinics, and talk about your experience there? Well,
there's a Sergeant Steve Offerman. He directs a program called HALT, which its sole responsibility is to, you know, take illegal drug pills and artificial pills off the streets. That's an entirely, you know, different segment of this problem, which is the artificial and fake pills that are out on the streets. But then there's an entire, you know, medical and Medicare fraud aspect that goes on as well, where people are using Medicare and Medicaid, getting it from victims, everything from homeless people on the street, to just, you know, normal individuals taking these pills, selling them to pharmacies, selling them on the street, repackaging them. Some pharmacies themselves are culpable in this. I mean, there's just so much in this. I mean, the bottom line is the patients that are suffering is the main issue at hand. But the illegal, you know, criminal aspect of it, and how much, you know, $300 billion is a number that they give us for the pharmaceutical industry, what they make. You know, this is what the companies make, but there's, you know, a completely underground black market where there's millions and hundreds of millions of dollars being made as well. So these are the two, you know, the two aspects of the film that we explore.
I wanted to just add that.
Yeah, of course.
I was going to say that what's really important to understand is that the pharmaceutical problem dwarfs the street drug problem. I mean, there's 3 times as many people on these drugs that die from these drugs than heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines combined. So the war on drugs, we're fighting the wrong war. I mean, the war should be against some of these pharmaceutical drugs that are killing people.
Well, to follow up on that, Gregory, why do you think it is that the U.S. is spending millions of dollars on a war on drugs to go after hard drugs like heroin, cocaine, and even marijuana, meanwhile overseeing the production of legal heroin with drugs like OxyContin and Vicodin?
That's a big question. The short answer is it's big business. I mean, pharmaceutical companies make an incredible amount of money. The medications are legal, so there is a combined investment to make sure that people are taking medications for a variety of ailments, whether they need it long-term or not. It's really been a situation where people all across the country are taking medications for the long term, and it's all about the money.
It really is. Sasha, I want to turn to you. You know, we used to be shocked to hear about celebrities dying from speedballs mixing heroin and cocaine, but now it's almost commonplace to hear about celebrities ODing, or even other people. I mean, I'm just saying celebrities as an example here, on some kind of prescription cocktail, yet it's never addressed the same way as hard drugs are. How much is the media to blame for the culture of acceptance?
Well, the media is to blame, and I just want to make another note. We spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., and one of the individuals interviewed in our film is Dr. Sidney Wolf, who is head of the FDA Advisory Committee in Washington. And he, you know, he states in the film that the pharmaceutical companies are the strongest lobby in America. They pretty much get whatever they want. They took it from the tobacco company, and now they are the masters, and they get so much money, and this influenced the media not only through direct-to-consumer advertising, but also in the media itself, you know, burying these crimes. And we see a lot of celebrities where initially reports come out where it is prescriptions that are, you know, connoted to their deaths, but then later on, when autopsies come out, they, you know, give a concoction of some other elements or some other drugs, and not really foregrounding or emphasizing that the prescription narcotics were a primary source of their death. So the media is complicit. We also see in movies and in television shows this perpetual usage of pills through, you know, the stars of TV shows.
It's glorified.
It's glorified, yes, exactly. Actors and shows. So that much like cigarettes did, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it makes children and other adults want to take those pills because they're seeing their favorite celebrities taking them, but then when these same celebrities are dying, they're not emphasizing it enough.
Exactly. It's totally downplayed. I'm really glad that you outlined that really well. Gregory, let's move on. Also, let's elaborate on what Sasha was saying earlier about the FDA. I mean, let's talk about how deep these pockets go. How big is the big pharma lobbying machine in Washington?
Well, it's most people feel like it's the #1 lobby right now, and when you look at the relationship between pharmaceutical companies and the FDA, it's a ludicrous relationship. The FDA is supposedly overseeing pharmaceutical companies to put out safe drugs, but yet at the same time, they get around 35% of their budget from these same pharmaceutical companies that have to pay fees to the FDA to get their drugs put on the market. And often people think I'm constantly bashing the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies. There are good people that work in both of these agencies and in pharmaceutical companies. However, I think that the interests of the people at the top of these pyramids are not always genuine. And we've seen time and time again where medications are put on the market that should have never gotten on the market. Information studies are suppressed. And then it isn't until the drug kills or maims enough people that you see the FDA riding in on a white horse to take a drug off the market that shouldn't have never been on the market in the first place. It's ludicrous.
Right, and the monopolies on patents for life-saving medication, et cetera. Gregory, I just wanted to follow up because you're a doctor. I mean, I think a lot of people who visit the doctor after seeing an ad on TV about restless leg syndrome or whatever else is on there, and then they're peddled certain drugs by the doctors. It seems like a vicious cycle. Is there any way to protect ourselves from becoming American addicts?
It's all about the people educating themselves, because you can't rely on television ads and even your doctor often enough to tell you exactly what to do. And again, I'm not bashing the doctors. Sometimes doctors get a lot of their information from the pharmaceutical companies. They are entwined in our medical schools, and I was one of them. I believed in a conventional medical approach until about 9 or 10 years ago when I saw that people simply weren't getting better. And I had more and more people that I was treating for chronic pain becoming addicted to these medications. And when I opened my eyes and really educated myself, it was a big difference.
Thank you so much. Everyone check it out, American Addict. It's on Netflix. You can find it online. Sasha Knezev, Dr. Gregory Smith, filmmakers, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, I'll dissect Obama's speech on NSA reform. Stay tuned.
We welcome Aaron Aid and Abby Martin, two of the terrific hosts on the RT network.
Boom Bust, it's going to give you a different perspective.
Give me one stock tip.
Oh, never. I'll give you the information, you make the decision.
Tell me about how breaking the set works.
It's a revolution of the mind. It's a revolution of ideas and consciousness.
Are you frustrated with the system?
Yeah, extremely.
Your politics would be described as angry.
I think I'm a strong female.
Are you single?
5 seconds. And over the mic is all fueling to go.
Did you know the press is the only industry specifically mentioned in the Constitution?
Stand by.
That's because a free and open press is critical to our democracy.
Track Alpha. Roll Alpha.
In fact, the single biggest threat facing our nation today is the corporate takeover of our government and our press.
Stand by, camera 1.
We've been hijacked by a handful of powerful transnational corporations that will profit by destroying what our founding fathers once built up. I'm Tom Hartman, and on this show, we reveal the big picture of what's actually going on in the world. We go beyond identifying the problem.
We try to fix it.
Rational debate and a real discussion of the critical issues facing America.
Stand by on camera, go.
Ready to join the movement? Then welcome to the big picture.
Earlier today, Obama gave his long-awaited speech on NSA reform. Unsurprisingly, he rejected nearly all of the most important recommendations that his own review panel suggested in the wake of the Snowden leaks. Bulk metadata collection is still A-OK. The information will just be stored in a yet-to-be-determined non-government site, and intelligence agencies will have to receive judicial approval before accessing that database. Obama also hinted that privacy advocates would have some kind of role in contesting these data requests, although, as of now, that role is completely unclear. But considering that courts have rejected only 0.3% of all government surveillance inquiries, somehow I don't think that judicial approval is going to be too difficult for the NSA to manage. So if not about substantive reform, what was this speech about? Well, it was a lot of this.
Men and women at the NSA know that if another 9/11 or massive cyber attack occurs, they will be asked by Congress and the media why they failed to connect the dots.
Ooh, did you feel the collective shiver of fear run across America just then? Let the re-traumatization begin. In fact, over the course of the 45-minute speech, Obama mentioned 9/11 8 times and said the words terrorist or terrorism 16 times. Do I even have to reiterate that you're 4 times more likely to be struck by lightning than killed in a terrorist attack in this country? But don't worry, words like transparency and accountability were mentioned a whopping 1 time each. But hey, this type of spying is all legal, so moral objections to whatever the NSA is doing doesn't really hold up in the court of law, right, Mr. Constitutional Lawyer?
Nothing that I've learned since indicated that our intelligence community has sought to violate the law or is cavalier about the civil liberties of their fellow citizens.
Well, except for a federal judge's recent ruling that this phone program was likely unconstitutional. And as far as the complaints abroad about warrantless spying on citizens from Germany to Brazil, Obama's got that covered.
A number of countries, including some who have loudly criticized the NSA, privately acknowledge that America has special responsibilities as the world's only superpower.
Ah, the classic American exceptionalism argument works every time. I'm glad that everyone has apparently privately confirmed to you that the rights of their citizens don't apply when you're the world's only superpower. And hey, as Obama reminded us, there's nothing to fear from your friendly neighborhood NSA agent. They're just as concerned about Fourth Amendment rights as the rest of us.
The folks at NSA and other intelligence agencies are our neighbors. They're our friends and family.
Silly me, all this time I didn't realize they're just nice old folks working at these intelligence agencies. Definitely not the kind of people that would want to murder their critics. Well, except for that pesky Edward Snowden character. That guy really needs to disappear, right? And speaking of Snowden, Obama had some kind words for the man who started this whole mess in the first place.
The sensational way in which these disclosures have come out has often shed more heat than light, while revealing methods to our adversaries that could impact our operations in ways that we may not fully understand for years to come.
More heat than light, huh? Does he mean heat on him or James Clapper or Keith Alexander? Because I won't disagree there. And frankly, without Snowden's disclosures, there's absolutely no way Obama would have had to stand there today and try to defend unlimited, unabated global surveillance. And of course, we're just supposed to take the government's word for it, because there was not one specific detail in that speech of how these leaks have actually made America less safe. But hey, these kind of facts just don't fit the narrative that Obama's trying to paint here. Remember, it's Bush's old story. Terrorists are all around us and will strike at any time and anywhere, and only all-encompassing global surveillance of every world citizen can stop them. Maybe instead of hope and change, Obama should have campaigned on despair and sameness. been over 12 years of U.S. military occupation in Afghanistan, making it the longest war in U.S. history. And last year, a tentative bilateral pact between Kabul and Washington was announced that could extend troop presence throughout the year 2024. Growing tensions between the U.S. and Afghanistan have led Afghani President Karzai to delay signing the agreement, and ongoing criminal incidents, including the drone execution of Afghan civilians, certainly aren't helping the situation. Just this week, yet another airstrike by coalition forces in North Kabul has left an unknown number of civilians dead. But yet another less explored aspect of this conflict is the U.S. government's gross mismanagement of tens of millions of taxpayer dollars that in many instances have actually ended up in the very same hands of the group the U.S. has fighting for over a decade. It's a topic my next guest, Douglas Wissing, examines in his book, Funding the Enemy, How U.S. Taxpayers Bankroll the Taliban. Douglas joined me earlier, and I first asked him to elaborate on the exact amount the U.S. has pretty much given that's ended up in the hands of the Taliban.
The UN Security Council, in a report last year, indicated about 10 to 20% of all the international funds that went into Afghanistan ended up in Taliban hands. I don't know the total for all the international dollars, but I think we're well over 600 billion ourselves. We're still spending about $1.5 billion a week in Afghanistan. So a lot of money is getting into Taliban hands.
Can you give some examples of how this money is being administered and to what pretense?
Well, what I documented in the book Funding the Enemy, and I went back to Afghanistan last year to see if anything had changed, is basically what I saw was a toxic network that connected ambitious American careerists who were kind of out there punching their ticket, for-profit American corporations, corrupt Afghan insiders, kleptocrats, and the Taliban. And essentially everybody was in on the tape. When I was first out there, soldiers started telling me, we're funding our own enemy. We would be driving around out in Taliban country in armored vehicles, and they started telling me these stories. And as I got back, started doing more research, confirming it with officers and digging into it, that was indeed the case. Everybody's in on the take. It's a malign network.
In 2001, I remember a really bizarre story about the U.S. paying the Taliban to, quote, switch sides. Seems really like an inconceivable concept to me. What was the strategy? Because pretty much seems completely counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive. That's a good word for it. The way the system often works, I can give you a couple of examples, and there's a very recent one that came out. There's an enormous dam and canal system in southern Afghanistan, in Helmand, primarily, that is called the Kajaki Dam. And that was put in with American money back in the 1960s when the United States and the Soviet Union were vying for influence in Afghanistan, an enormous project, and it was supposed to bring water to the desert. Well, what it did by the time we get to the 21st century and our war there is it is watering the great poppy fields of the world, the opium poppy fields. So you have poppies to the horizon. Afghanistan is now the world's largest producer of opium poppy, about 90% of the total. So that Kajaki Dam, of course, first we bombed it when we invaded, then we started rebuilding it because that's where the real money is. So we have hired these for-profit corporations to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of generators and whatnot. The Kajaki Dam is we've got about 500 million in the Kajaki Dam now. There was a third turbine that was delivered in 2008, but we've never been able to install it because it's surrounded by the Taliban. It's completely Taliban-controlled country.
You brought up opium, which was my next question. A really, really interesting case how the Taliban had nearly eradicated the crop. Now 90% of the world's heroin or opium comes from Afghanistan. I mean, I find it hard to believe that with guard posts and surveillance drones monitoring Afghanistan, that the opium supply routes wouldn't be able to be stopped or at least tracked if the government really cared about fighting a war on drugs. What's your opinion? I mean, how much of this war is about protecting or even overseeing the opium trade?
Well, I think this is an example of the toxic network that I've been talking about. Is the Afghan insiders are part and parcel of the opium trade, and the warlords that empowered when we first came in there were essentially opium lords. Those are the same people who are still involved with the trade. And so the Taliban gets their part, the government officials get their part.
You know, I also reckon back to an article, 108,000 plus private contractors in there. The Pentagon was asked what the hell they're doing there, and they didn't really have a definitive answer. Have we figured that out yet, what the private contractors are doing on the ground?
Well, in some cases, almost nothing. I mean, if you want to have an opportunity to really perfect your craft skills, that's the place to do it, because they are it's hilarious how little, I'm not speaking of all of them, and I should say I've dealt with lots and lots of extraordinarily outrageous, hardworking people, but it's ridiculous out there. People just, I sat across from one contractor in Kandahar in one of the mess halls, and he was one of those har kind of guys, and he was talking to another contractor, and he said, "Oh, we got to keep this war going. You know, we're making so much money," and that's just the way it is. These folks are making enormous amounts of money. I spoke with a fellow who said he had been offered, I believe it was $225,000 or $250,000 a year to train drivers to ride in convoys.
Unbelievable, Douglas. I mean, the more that you're talking about this, the more it does seem like the war is just meant to be sustained. I mean, we know about the potential strategic pact that will keep troops there till 2024. I mean, tensions between Washington and Kabul are rising, especially after the recent U.S. airstrike that killed an unknown number of civilians there. How do you think that these drone strikes that are continuing are going to affect the so-called strategic pact that Karzai is kind of pushing right now?
I think the drone strikes are a great recruitment tool for the insurgency. Revenge is a major cornerstone of the Pashtun culture. They don't forget these things. So if your cousin is killed, they're not going to forget that. There's a great Pashtun saying about, "I took my revenge after 100 years, and I'm only sorry I did it so soon." People have long memories. These people don't have a lot of things, they have relationships.
That was Douglas Wissing, author of Funding the Enemy, How U.S. Taxpayers Bankroll the Taliban. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you Monday when I break the set all over again next week. To murder Snowden. A current NSA analyst told the website that, quote, "In a world where I would not be restricted from killing an American, I personally would go and kill him myself." A lot of people share this sentiment. Wait a minute, we do live in a world where drones kill American citizens. What's this guy waiting for? Another anonymous Pentagon official told BuzzFeed that he or she would love to put a bullet in Snowden's head. And an Army official offered a detailed fantasy of how the murder would go down, involving injecting him with poison. You know, it's just so nice to know that Jack the Ripper and Freddy Krueger are the ones in charge of responsible. I'm sure that most of us has either lost someone to drug addiction or at least known someone who has. Now, drug addiction is a complicated issue. It can destroy not only individual lives, but it can break apart entire families and disrupt communities. And despite America's declared war against illicit drugs, really mining all of our personal data. Now let's go break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. Do not answer that. I want you to watch what we're about to do, because you've never seen anything like this on television. What we need is to question.
Happy Friday, people. I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So we all know that the intelligence community would love nothing more than to apprehend NSA leaker Edward Snowden and parade him around in front of the world as an example of what happens to whistleblowers in this country. What I didn't know is that some NSA employees want to take it a step further, you know, to American Psycho levels. According to BuzzFeed, several Pentagon and NSA officials have anonymously expressed their desire, such as heroin, cocaine, and marijuana. Little stands in the way of average people obtaining legal narcotics, many of which are far more addictive than the hardest drugs you'll find on the street. Now, it might shock you to learn that the U.S. is #1 when it comes to the consumption of prescription pills. In fact, a 2013 study by the Mayo Clinic shows that nearly 70% of Americans are on at least one prescription drug, and more than half take at least two, with the most commonly prescribed being antidepressants and painkillers. This epidemic is the subject of a documentary called American Addict, and it explores the road that